Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Atlanta Economics Club's December webinar. Today's talk is going to cover the benefits cliff. We're very fortunate to have such a preeminent speaker in this field to help detail all the implications. Excited to hear what Dr. Altig has to say. For those that haven't been to our events, that have been to our events before, please welcome back. We're getting close to the halfway point in our 2021-2022 program. A lot of good speakers so far this year and plenty more to come over the next couple of months. And so I hope you've been enjoying it so far, and I hope you come back. For the first time attendees, welcome to the Atlanta Economics Club. I hope you enjoy the content that we're providing today. Always welcome to come back for our next event in January. As a reminder, please put all of the questions that you might have during today's session in the Q&A section here in the webinar. We'll try to leave about 10 or 15 minutes or so at the end for some questions and also some closing club announcements. I'd also just quickly note that while Dr. Altig is certainly knowledgeable about monetary policy matters, today's webinar falls within the Fed's blackout period, so there's not going to be a whole lot in the way of monetary policy talk today. So, if you have questions about sort of the policy direction, it's probably not going to be answered this time around. With that said, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. David Altig, who is Executive Vice President and Director of Research at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. In addition to advising the bank's president on monetary policy, Dr. Altig oversees the bank's research division, including its team of economists, the Regional Economic Information Network, and the bank's Community and Economic Development function, where he leads the Atlanta Fed's research and engagement portfolio on benefits cliff, which is the topic for today. He also serves as a member of the bank's management and discount committees, and is the executive co-sponsor of the bank's Working Family Employee Resource Network. Before joining the Atlanta Fed, Dr. Altig served as the Vice President and Associate Director of Research at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. He joined the Cleveland Fed in 1991 as an economist before being promoted in 1997. And before joining the Cleveland Fed, he was a lecturer at the University of Indiana. He's also lectured at several other universities, including Ohio State University, Duke University, University of Iowa. Dr. Altig graduated from the University of Iowa with a bachelor's degree in business administration. He earned a master's and doctorate degree in economics from Brown University, currently an adjunct professor at the University of Chicago's School of Business. And just lastly, I'd like to say that Dr. Altig has been very involved with just the broader business economics community. He's the incoming president of the National Association for Business Economists, and he's been a supporter of the Atlanta Economics Club for years here. For those of you that have been members for a while, I think it's worth noting that Dr. Altig was one of the key proponents in the partnership between the AEC and the Atlanta Federal Reserve. One of the main reasons why we have AEC meetings at the Fed, at least before the pandemic, was due to some of his efforts. So with all that out of the way, I'd like to welcome Dr. Altig, and please take it away.
Thanks so much for the introduction. I have to correct one thing. It's the Ohio State University. That seems to be important to everyone in Ohio, from where I'm from. So it's great to be here. It's always great to be with a NABE affiliated group. I know from my involvement with the national organization that the Atlanta group is actually one of the most vital and active groups in the country. And that's a testament to the current and past officers and to all of you. So it's a special pleasure to be with you today. And it's a special pleasure to talk about this topic, understanding benefits cliffs. As Ibrahim mentioned, this is sort of near and dear to my heart, and actually is one of the topics that occupies a lot of my work at the Fed. So even though I cannot weigh in much on monetary policy today, I am weighing in on Fed affairs for sure. So I thought I would start by giving a little bit of a sense of how it is we came to take on this topic. So here's a statement that you're all aware of. This will, of course, be updated later on today, but it seems highly likely that the statement of our mandate from Congress is not going to change between now and then. So the dual mandate, as you're all familiar with, does give us responsibility for maximum employment and price stability goals as part of our monetary policy operations and objectives. But of course, the thing to recognize is that monetary policy, which is what yesterday and today's FOMC meeting is all about and what most people are typically focused on, is really one of 5 core missions that the Federal Reserve System has. So the other missions include financial stability. That's that fostering payment and settlement system safety and efficiency bit. Well, that's the payments bit. I'm sorry. There's promoting financial system stability is related to the supervision and regulatory activities we engage in. And then the payment system is a correlate to both financial stability and those supervisory efforts. And then there's a 5th that doesn't get talked about a whole bunch, but was clear from my bio, that involves promoting consumer protection and community development. Every single Federal Reserve Bank has a community economic development function that is connected to the broad activity that the Board of Governors has oversight for. And its mission is to address issues related to low and moderate income populations. You have heard many times that monetary policy, even though we have that maximum employment mandate, is a pretty blunt instrument for dealing with all of the issues that are reflected in the function of labor markets, and in particular, things that are, for example, related to the distribution of income, are in general difficult to address through monetary policies. So our community economic development groups spend some time thinking hard about how, within the context of the mission of the Federal Reserve, we might more directly address the challenges and issues that face low and moderate income populations. And really that sort of orientation hits in some way or another on all 5 of these functions. At the Atlanta Fed, that's reflected in the strategic priorities that we adopted specifically a couple years ago. There's a payments innovation piece there, reflecting our role in the payment system, and in particular, the Atlanta Fed's special role in the payments operations of the Federal Reserve. We used to run what is called the Retail Product Office, which is things like overseeing ACH activities. That has now moved to a more federated activity, but the Atlanta Fed still plays a central role in that function. There's an internal sort of priority, that's number 3, to make sure that we're doing our job as efficiently as we can as an organization. But the one I want to focus on, and the one related to the benefits cliff, and the one that's an adjunct to that maximum employment monetary policy mandate, is the cause of advancing economic mobility and resilience. And one of the reasons that we chose this as a priority is precisely because it is at the center of all of the core missions of the Federal Reserve, and certainly the core mission of our Community Economic Development Group. So how do we think about this mandate or this priority for promoting economic and resilience? Well, our approach is to think about economic mobility in terms of human capital development, the returns to investment in skill attainment and occupational choice. And to answer the question that's on this slide, how do a family's resources change over time as a result of obtaining education or training or education that's necessary to qualify for specific types of jobs, and what can we do as an institution, or what do we know about through our research work about the policies, practices, activities that promote the advancement of a family through education and training. And that's really what the workforce development perspective is about. Do we know of impediments, or do we know of enhancements that can promote economic mobility and resilience through this sort of human capital investment channel? So there's a lot of activity that's gone on throughout the Federal Reserve System to shine a light on the possibilities, and in particular, the possibilities, as I said, in the community economic development space for low and moderate income individuals. So one of the pieces of research that has been done in the past, half decade or so, has been this attempt to identify across the nation what we've called opportunity occupations. So what opportunity occupations are jobs that do not require four-year college degrees, but pay more than local median wages. So I've thrown up on this slide what the top 10 opportunity occupations are in Fulton County in particular, or more generally, the Atlanta MSA. But this work, which you can see if you can see the source line there, resides at the Cleveland Fed, and you can look it up for any MSA in the country and find out what in that locality represents the top 10 opportunity occupations for that location. So often we think about those opportunity occupations in the context of a pretty well-developed workforce development model called a career pathway model. And here's an example of one. You think about sort of starting with an entry-level position. In this case, I'm thinking about a healthcare career pathway. So that entry-level position might be a certified nursing assistant. Now, if you kind of think back to that previous slide, a certified nursing assistant is not one of those opportunity occupations because it is not a very high-paying job. It doesn't pay more than the median wage in particular, but it is a step on the way to those opportunity occupations in healthcare, like licensed practical nurse or registered nurse. So you're often thinking in terms of kind of entering the job market in some entry-level position in a sector, obtaining credentials and experience along the way that allow you to move up some career pathway to a higher paying and more resilient sort of job for everyone. So we think a lot in this sort of workforce development effort about how do we get people into these pathways, and more importantly, how do we position them to move up the pathway to these opportunity occupations or better. Now, here's a problem that we discovered as we were thinking about that effort, particularly in the context of healthcare. Healthcare is, if you look at any MSA across the country, if you look at all of the opportunity occupations in those MSAs, these healthcare pathways almost always emerge as an opportunity occupation. And the pathways are very well defined. I mean, it's a very clear trajectory from the entry level position like a certified nursing assistant on up to RN. And there are lots of programs to move people onto those pathways and then up them to a sustainable living sort of wage is sort of the language of art. And I'll describe what that is a little bit more detail in a second. But the research on these efforts has been anything but encouraging, as this slide attests to. So there was a very large grant program that was put in place across the country called the Health Profession Opportunity Grant Program, which was designed to provide funding for moving people into these entry-level jobs in healthcare and then hopefully on up the career pathway. But one of the things in the review or retro, if you will, on these sorts of on this program in particular, is that only about a 4.5% of those who completed the entry level training continued on to other training, which is a pretty woeful record, and certainly has caused everyone to sort of take a step back and ask, what is it about the program, and what is it about the individuals and the constraints they are facing when we move them into these opportunities that is keeping them from realizing the full benefit of the effort. Well, I don't know that I'm here to give you an answer, but we sort of had this aha moment as almost at the time we were puzzling through why the most sophisticated, really, and intensive of these programs was not having the desired effect on economic mobility and workforce development. And I happened to run across this paper at about the time we were asking those questions that did something sort of interesting. It calculated the tax rates faced by individuals in different wealth quintiles. So the basis of the data for the study was the Survey of Consumer Finances from the Board of Governors. And the idea was to calculate tax rates in a very comprehensive way. That is, the way an economist would think about this is that the taxes you pay are not just what you write a check to the, I guess we don't write checks anymore, but you make a payment to the government out of your pocket. What really is important is the net tax rate. That is the tax rate that is calculated as what you give to the government minus what the government gives back to you. So for most of us, that would be things like Social Security payments, perhaps if you're old enough, or some sort of ACA subsidy, perhaps. But for lower income individuals, it includes a whole array of other things like public assistance programs for healthcare, for food, et cetera, et cetera. And if you take a comprehensive view of taxation like that, you end up with numbers like which are on this slide, which is telling us that if we were just, for example, to think about income taxes, we would say that lower wealth individuals are facing very low tax rates. And of course, the tax rates rise substantially as you go up the wealth distribution. But that's not true when you take into account the things that the government takes away as an individual earns more income. And if you take that more comprehensive view of taxation, then this system is really not very progressive at all. In fact, those individuals in the lowest two quintiles pay the same tax rate as individuals in the third wealth quintile, and they don't pay tax rates that are substantially lower than the very wealthiest individuals in the country. And if you dig into it, the problem gets even worse. Because if you think about if you look at the dispersion of tax rates faced by individuals. So I said this data is collected by making calculations out of the Survey of Consumer Finances. So it's calculated at the individual level. So we can kind of look across individuals and ask questions like, well, in this sample, what is the lowest tax rate paid by somebody? And here I'm talking about marginal tax rates, the amount of tax that you pay, net tax that you pay by earning, another $1,000 or whatever the case may be. And we can also look at the person who pays the highest marginal tax rate. So one of the things that you see for the two lowest wealth quintiles, that is the least wealthy individuals in the country, the dispersion is very, very large, much larger than it is at higher quintiles. And in fact, in some cases, the marginal tax rates can be very, very high. And for the kind of least lucky individual in the lowest wealth quintile in this sample, there's a tax rate of over 900%, meaning, for the privilege of earning a buck, you get to hand over more than $9 to the government. We subsequently followed up on this in other research that we've done. Even though a 900% tax rate for low wealth individuals is an outlier, it's very large. The 70th or the 90th percentile of tax rates, which means that 10% of the people in this wealth quintile are paying higher rates, is about 70%. And it's not rare to see tax rates of 100%. So these can be very, very large, very, very high tax rates being faced by individuals who are least wealthy in the country, much higher than for the highest wealth individuals in the country. So this seems very problematic. In the language of workforce development, what these high marginal tax rates represent is this benefit cliffs phenomenon. So translating it into this sort of other language, which really is just about high effective marginal tax rates, a benefit cliffs most narrowly is the abrupt loss of means tested public benefits associated with a small increase in income. So you earn another dollar, you earn another $1,000, and you lose a fairly large amount of potentially public assistance of some sort, which in the language of taxation is a high marginal tax rate. Sort of more broadly, we think of the benefit cliffs problem as any reduction in benefits that results from income gains, which also means effectively a higher tax rate on income earned. So I'm going to think about then the question that I posed very much earlier, that is, how does a family's resources change when they make an investment in skills, when they make an investment in, and those skills could be attained through formal training, or they could be attained by simply on-the-job experience. But we're going to ask this question about mobility. How does a family's resources change as they earn more income? So net resources here are going to be defined in the way that I define that sort of broad look at net income, which is the income you earn plus whatever public assistance. I probably should use the word public transfers an individual might receive from a government entity, minus taxes paid. And then I'm going to think about basic expenses. So we're also, because we are talking about low and moderate income populations here, I want to think about sort of concepts like sustainable incomes, or sometimes they're called living wages or something like that. So it's very obvious that the benefits cliff live in this public assistance space. We're really in many ways going to be asking the question, how does public support for low and moderate income individuals change when income rises? And by the way, it doesn't have to be low, and this concept does not require thinking about low and moderate income population. So you could think about means tested Social Security benefits, for example, and this sort of net resource and the associated rate of taxation can equally apply to individuals who are not sort of at the low end of the wealth distribution. But because our focus is on low and moderate income populations, and particularly in the context of this workforce development question, I'm going to think largely about kind of the public assistance space on this. So I'm going to visualize this by showing you a picture. Some of you may have seen this picture before, and this picture just plots this concept of net resources against some arbitrary measure of pre-tax income or gross income for a particular family type. So the family type I'm going to choose is an individual living in Atlanta, Georgia, a single adult with 2 children ages 4 and 6. And that's important that you kind of specify the demographic because, of course, the public assistance that will be received and even the taxes that are paid, as well as basic expenses, will depend upon the family type. So if I take that particular type and draw this picture that I've put up here, this is what it looks like. And to say that that is nonlinear is a little bit of an overstatement. And in fact, many of the problematic elements that we are addressing in this benefits cliff work, or that is reflected in those high marginal tax rates that I showed you at the outset that kind of led us to this work, are evident in this picture. So on the one hand, you see outright cliffs. So as income goes up, you hit these periods of time where even though your income is higher, the net resources you have for your family decline very, very sharply, associated with the phase out of some sort of public assistance. But less dramatic, but no less important, are these things we call benefits plateaus, which is periods where, effectively your marginal tax rate is 100%. So even though your income is going up, your net resources are flat because the income is taken away through some combination of higher explicit taxation and the loss of public benefits. Now, this picture, which is actually very common sort of in the benefits cliff literature, and as I said, some of you may have seen this before, it's not all that useful for the workforce development question because we aren't kind of in that context talking about arbitrary changes in income, but changes in income that an individual can realize over time in their family as they enter new career trajectories or traverse along an existing career trajectory. So I want to cast all of that in this workforce development context. But first, I want to make the point that this is not an abstract or arbitrary problem. We do have some evidence that this benefit cliffs issue is actually impacting the decisions that real people are making. So here's some evidence from a poll conducted of employers in Ohio a few years back, who asked the question, have you found that some employees or candidates at your company are unwilling to accept jobs or increased work hours or other advancement because they fear they will lose certain government benefits? And they described it as welfare payments, unemployment benefits, childcare, and Medicaid. Well, nearly 1 in 6 of the businesses in the poll, employers in the poll, answered yes. And every single one of the reasons that were posed in the question showed up as an issue for these businesses who said, yes, they had realized or experienced that issue with their employees. In fact, 30% of those who answered affirmatively experienced all 3 issues: promotions, pay increases, and other sorts of advancement, including hiring in the positions that they had available. In Alabama, not very long ago, in fact, at the beginning of this year, there was a poll done of unemployed and underemployed workers, asking them a very similar question from the employee's point of view. And what they found is that more than a third of the respondents who fell in this unemployed or were basically in low wage jobs category had declined or delayed some job opportunity because they were afraid of losing some kind of government benefit. So this is all by way of saying that that kind of hypothetical problem that I showed you on that chart a few minutes ago actually shows its way into the real world. And of course, we sit up and notice this at a time where we are struggling. And many businesses are reporting that they're struggling to find employees at a time when employees are very clearly struggling with finding themselves meaningful and well-paying work to enhance their own mobility and resilience. So I want to now cast this in this workforce development context and show you how we do it. So here's a picture that I'm going to play with for a little bit here. And it's the picture of a wage trajectory. This is, again, based upon data from Fulton County. And it is an answer to the following question. If an individual enters into a job as a cashier in Fulton County, if they stay in that job and experience normal wage growth that is experience related through time, what would their wage trajectory or income trajectory, again, before taxes, look like? So here it is. You start off at about $17,000. That would be the normal cashier entry level wage in Fulton County. And you kind of grow to a wage that equates to about $25,000 after about 25 years or so. Well, this is not the sort of job we want to put people in. We want to think about those opportunity occupations. I want to think about that opportunity occupation in healthcare using that kind of career pathway model and ask the following question: what would it look like if we took this individual, we got them the training necessary to receive a certification as a certified nursing assistant, and then they stayed in that job for the rest of their careers? Well, that wage path is the red line there. And so you see something fairly obvious here. First of all, in the first year in the labor market, wages or income is pretty low, and that reflects the training period necessary to get the certified nursing assistant qualification. So we make an assumption here. The assumption we make is that during the period of time that an individual has to go through the training to qualify as a certified nursing assistant, they drop their hours to half time in a minimum wage job. So that's sort of the first year of their experience in the labor market. But after they've become a certified nursing assistant, wages are quite a bit higher, in fact, equal to almost the terminal point on this chart of the near minimum wage job. And then the gap between the minimum wage job and the nursing assistant job increases through time. So that all looks like a pretty good investment. And in fact, that is exactly the point of beginning to move people into these positions through supporting training through things like that Health Professionals Opportunity Grant program. Well, I want to now make this choice available to a hypothetical individual. The hypothetical individual we refer to as Leah. This is actually modeled sort of after a real person. And Leah has to decide on whether or not she wants to move from this cashier job into this higher paying certified nursing assistant path, which is not only higher paying today, but has the expectation of being higher paying throughout the rest of her life. Now, the wrinkle here is that Leah has a family. She's a single mom. Like that other picture I showed you, she has children who are ages 4 and 6. And she is receiving a package that is fairly common for someone in a minimum wage job in her circumstance of public assistance, which includes various sorts of food assistance, like reduced or free school lunches, like the SNAP or food stamps. And she's receiving some healthcare support, maybe in the form of Medicaid, maybe in the form of Affordable Care Act subsidies. And she avails herself of various tax credit programs like the child care tax credit and the earned income tax credit. So now we're going to take Leah and we're going to give her this opportunity to engage in this investment in human capital, get a certified nursing assistant position. And Leah's question is, should I do that? And I could show her the picture that I just showed you. But as you probably have already anticipated, that's not going to be the whole picture, because Leah's just not going to care about her gross income. She's going to care about her net resources, or her take-home pay, if you will. And when you draw that picture, it looks really different. The nursing assistant job A, and the minimum wage job for that matter, don't exhibit this kind of constant upward trajectory. That's a little depressing. And the gap looks a lot less substantial for the certified nursing assistant position relative to the near minimum wage job than it did before we took into account what is happening in this picture. And what's happening in this picture is, of course, the high rate of marginal taxation as income grows associated with the benefits cliff. Now we can kind of summarize. That picture, you'll kind of look at it and you say, well, most of the time, the red line's above the blue line. So the nursing assistant position looks like it dominates, but man, there's these periods where that's not so clearly the case. This is associated with lots of things happening, basic expenses changing, the amount of public assistance changing, taxation changing as Leah's family circumstances are altered throughout her life cycle. But we can kind of summarize by asking, sort of the question, well, if I look over time and in fact, look over Leah's working life, what's the gain into making this investment in becoming a nursing assistant relative to the minimum wage occupation over her lifetime? So that orange bar there represents the present discounted value of the excess of earnings or excess of net resources that Leah can enjoy by becoming a nursing assistant rather than staying in a near minimum wage occupation. All right, that's over the lifetime. But if we look at periods of time and time horizons that are probably more relevant to Leah's decision making, things aren't so clear. That is, getting to this long-term gain takes quite a while. And in fact, if you look at the first period of 3 years for Leah, the return to the nursing assistant investment is actually negative. And the reason for that, of course, is the income lost in the first year as she receives this training to become a certified nursing assistant, which is not made up by the increase in income over the first several years. And even over the first 5 years, the gains are pretty minimal. And this looks like a picture of a very big disincentive to exploit this opportunity to get on this particular career pathway. And not exploiting that opportunity is the recipe for a lack of mobility and resilience, and not at all clearly not an irrational decision. As we all know, that there are lots of issues on the path of getting from the short term to the long term. The payoff in the long term is about $50,000. The payoff in the very near term is negative. And, we see this a lot. And by the way, this example, so in a day or two, I will give a talk like this. Again, on that talk, I'm going to give the example of Leah. I'm going to move Leah out of Atlanta, and I'm going to put her in Nashville, Tennessee. And if she was living in Nashville, Tennessee, the nature of the public assistance programs, the nature of the local wages means that through year 10, the return to this pathway for Leah, or at least the return to getting on the entry level of this pathway for Leah, is actually negative through year 10, which is a very strong disincentive to engage in human capital development of this sort. Now, here's the good news in all of this, and I'll conclude here and be glad to start shifting to answering any questions you might have. The nature of the machinery that we use to make these calculations it is actually an adaptation of a tax planning piece of software that was originally engineered to, hand over to people with some amount of wealth and have them calculate basically their own financial planning opportunities. So it included, and retirement in particular was sort of aimed at, as it included public benefits in the form of Social Security pay. But we adapted that to this sort of low income individual. And as a consequence, we do calculate both the tax payments that an individual makes and, of course, the public assistance that they receive. So we can actually ask the question that is answered in these blue bars: what does the taxpayer save by virtue of Leah becoming a certified nursing assistant rather than staying in a minimum wage job? And the answer is, from the get-go, that number is positive. And in fact, in the long run, it's quite positive, swamps the private return to Leah from engaging in this sort of human capital investment, and swamps it through any kind of horizon over her life. Now, those of us, who have kind of remember our public finance training will recall that, one of the causes of inefficient outcomes in the marketplace is a return to private decisions that is different than the return to the public. And this is a picture, if you ever saw one, of a divergence between the positive return to the public and the private return to an individual. Another way to put that is pretty simple. If there is any amount of this surplus that goes to the taxpayer that can be diverted to Leah to make her incentives more in line with the public return, is a net gain to everyone. And that is exactly one of the key policy questions that we're trying to address in this benefits cliff research and on the ground advising that we're doing at the Atlanta Fed. So with that, let me stop. And I saw that there are probably some questions that came in, and I'd be glad to try to address them. I guess I can read them. So the first one's giving me, so do you want to read them to me or choose, or how would you like?
Either or, whichever one you feel most comfortable with.
Maybe if you read them off to me so that you can read the next one while I'm answering one.
Sure. So I guess I'll bounce around in here, but this one I think ties a little bit to your last point with this idea of there being just like a benefit to taxpayers overall to eliminating this benefits cliff. One of the attendees said it's very discouraging that wages between $20,000 and $50,000 are effectively like the same. Do you feel like government policy is preparing more to alleviate the tax burden for people in this cohort? or increasing benefits? Now, I mean, in effect, the effect is the same, but
Yeah.
which way do you think it's leaning?
No, I actually think that the answer is the system is not benefiting either party. Um, uh, so the best description that I have heard from actual, and I actually heard this from someone who ran one of these programs or was responsible for running one of these programs in one of the states, actually in the 6th district, said, the problem is that our public assistance programs are geared to survival and not to growth. So that, they are, they're basically kind of designed as these sort of stopgap, throw some money at a problem. That's a little bit of a brusque way to put it, but they're to get someone from from today to tomorrow, who is struggling to get from today to tomorrow. And they weren't designed from the beginning, and still are not designed to think about, well, what happens the next day and what happens the day after that. So I really like the phrase, we need to shift the focus of our public policy design and our public assistance design from survival to growth. That will solve the survival problem, but then also, if we do it right, but also contribute to a system that actually does serve both individuals and the taxpayer.
I think that sort of answers a second question that sort of came in, which is which policies would reduce these benefits cliffs, right? And it sounds to me like you're saying that it involves just a rethinking of what it is we're trying to do with public policy, right? That this kind of shift needs to occur.
Yeah.
Just the way that we approach these things.
Yeah, the first step is, and I think this is happening, is to reconceive the notion of these programs, to coordinate in an important way these programs. One of the problems and one of the reasons that these, I want to be a little bit careful, because we're not in the business of advocating fiscal policies and tax policies and public assistance programs, but I think it's widely acknowledged that the programs aren't like food assistance versus medical care versus housing assistance or transportation assistance. They're not integrated in any way. They're just sort of these standalone problems and or programs. And if you fix one, it often rebounds into creating some new problem in the other one. They're run by different agencies. They're run by different sets of rules. It's just a completely incoherent system, and needs to be integrated, needs to be reconceived in this growth rather than survival mode. And you got to break through a very entrenched bureaucracy to do that. And it's not an evil bureaucracy because people are trying to do the wrong things. It's just that, we've set up this difficult system to navigate. Even people who are responsible for administering the programs have difficulty navigating it sometimes. You can imagine what it is from someone who's on the receiving end of it
all. Shifting gears a little bit, a question here asking whether or not uncertainty in terms of future employment or income prospects, does that play a significant role in looking at human capital investments? That is to say, like,
yeah.
You gave an example of a pretty well-defined career path of a nurse as they work through healthcare. What about fields where there's less certainty about the prospects once?
Yeah, that's really an excellent question. So I used to have this sort of rote response to employers who would say, the kind of poster child example, head scratcher example was, manufacturer has welding jobs, and they have jobs that are paying, low six-figure salaries after a fairly short period of time and without a whole ton of prior training and experience involved, why aren't people taking them? One answer to that I used to always give was, well, you're in manufacturing, and one of the things we ought to think about is that maybe they saw their grandfather, work in a plant for 35, 40 years, turn 50, and then the plant shuts down. And not only does the plant shut down, the whole city that kind of is depending upon the plant, goes into the tank. And, this is kind of a very difficult prospect to kind of, do I want to is that where I want to put my money would be the question for my future. The answer to that, I think, is an orientation in this workforce development space that is skills-based rather than strictly occupation-based. So you think about a job as a bundle of skills, and then you think about the transferability of those skills to not only different work within a sector, but even cross sectors, so that you are positioned as best you can be to be nimble and resilient. So remember that the initiative is not just economic mobility, it's also economic resilience. And one of those, the hallmark of a resilience is being able to deal with the uncertainty and the outcomes that may kind of not turn your way in the future. So, that's it's an excellent question. And it is one of those things that, policymakers and workforce development practitioners and we at the Atlanta Fed are struggling with as we speak.
So I'm going to try and combine a couple of questions here. I know we're getting up close to the hour, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I just wanted to ask whether or not you were noticing any level of distortions in these kind of cliffs over the past few years. One, because of the changes in benefits that have occurred during the pandemic, right? Like all kinds of emergency assistance was introduced that wasn't previously there. But also before that, in 2017, there were changes to the tax code and what that does to things. And I'm wondering if you're noticing some distortions in the way the benefits code.
The answer to that is yes, in the sense that those calculations I showed you are current law. So they are actually adjusted for all of the current assistance programs. I have not, to be perfectly honest, gone back and kind of done a retro, if you will, on the evolution of these assistance provisions to answer the question: did they make the cliffs more severe or not severe? I would not want to include automatically that they did. One of the ways you can address some of these cliffs problems is you make them not cliffs, you make them ramps. So you phase out much more slowly. That's a more expensive proposition, but sometimes that can kind of help this severe disincentive to earn extra income. So I'm not sure if I would not want to confidently say whether they got better or worse. I think I can pretty confidently say that they did not measure up to the standard that I suggested we ought to be applying earlier of asking the question, are we making things better or worse with the way we've designed these enhanced benefits? So it's not the enhanced benefits even so much per se that matter, but rather the design of them. And, one of the things that we're advocating strongly, not specific legislation, but rather being thoughtful about legislation and incorporating these ideas of cliffs and disincentives to work into the design of the programs.
So one last question. I know we're running out of time here, but you mentioned Nashville's example as being like an area where there's more significant disincentives to pursue this educational path. Just wondering whether or not there's an example of an MSA that does the opposite, that has less of a problem in this regard.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the design of the program. In some cases, it's just the local wages. So one way it can look worse in Nashville than it does in Atlanta is because the wage for a certified nursing assistant is higher relative, just because of market forces, relative to the minimum wage job than it is in Nashville. I haven't really sort of dissected, across lots of localities, which ones look best, but part of that is because it's not always or even typically a result of the program design, but although it often is. But it's often also the case that it's just the markets are just different, and the returns to some jobs are higher. For example, registered nurse is an opportunity occupation in almost every MSA in the country. Licensed practical nurse is not always an opportunity occupation, and that just has to do with local wages.
All right. With that, we are out of time here. We're at 1 o'clock. I do want to thank you again, Dr. Altig, for spending some time with us. I thought this was a fascinating presentation of an issue I don't think everybody necessarily thinks about when they think about government assistance and public policy. So it's very informative. There were a lot of questions. I know we couldn't quite get to everybody's, but we did our best. Just real quickly before we close out, our next meeting is Wednesday, January 19th. So be on the lookout for emails and things like that in the weeks running up to that. That's going to be with Martha Moore, who's the chief economist at the American Chemistry Council, and she's just going to give an outlook for where we think 2022 is expected to be. So again, thank you very much. I thought it was great. It was a fantastic presentation here.
Thanks very much.